Marco Rubio, who seems to welcome Europe's involvement in peace talks. Take a listen.
We'd like them to remain engaged. I think they can help us. I think the UK and France and Germany can help us move the ball on this and get this closer to a resolution. I thought they were very helpful and constructive with their ideas. So we welcome their input. We welcome their involvement. We think it's important. There are probably elements of this as well. I always remind everybody that part of the sanctions against Russia, many of them, are European sanctions that we can't lift if that's ever to be part of a deal. So they're going to have to be involved no matter what. It's their continent. This is happening on the continent of Europe. And so obviously European powers will care deeply about what happens. So they have a stake in this, and we recognize it. And but in the end, I think we all want the same thing.
For more on this, Erin Ogunkeye from our International Affairs desk joins us here on set. Erin, what came out of this meeting?
So, Catalina, I think a lot of positive comments about it, but not much in the form of concrete progress. There was no official joint announcement or statement at the end of the meeting. Marco Rubio said today, as we just heard there, that Washington actually might simply end its involvement in peace talks if no progress is made in the coming days. In any case, arguably what's new about these discussions compared to others is that it gave the Europeans a seat at the negotiating table alongside Ukraine and the United States. Now, initially, the meeting was going to be just between American and French representatives, but at the last minute, the French president also invited partners from Ukraine, the UK, and Germany. Emmanuel Macron described these meetings as excellent, very productive. He said it was a perfect occasion, again, for Washington, Kyiv, and Brussels to try and resolve some of the numerous sticking points of this war, even though he acknowledged that different parties might not have the recipe or the details of what that might look like. Now, the Ukrainians, for their part, used the occasion to remind delegates of some of the requirements for peace. That includes Kyiv not remaining neutral. In other words, it will not forego seeking membership in NATO. It will not demilitarize, nor will it limit its armed forces. It will not recognize the Russian occupation in any of its territory. And it also wants solid security guarantees to prevent future aggressions. As a final detail, as we can see on that graphic there, it wants the return of all Ukrainian prisoners of wars and civilians that were forcibly displaced to Russia, amongst some of the other things, but those are the main demands. Something the parties did agree on is to give up on the possibility of a partial ceasefire, as we had seen them try to do a few weeks ago, notably in restricting attacks on energy infrastructure in both countries. But the thorniest issues remain unresolved. That is, of course, what will become of the territory that Russian forces occupy in Ukraine right now, and of course, who will enforce a ceasefire if and when it is reached.
But Erin, Europeans were hoping that this meeting signaled that they could return as major actors in negotiating an end to the war. Is that likely?
Well, actually, the French foreign minister, in that sense, Catalina, described Thursday's exchange as a diplomatic success for France. You'll recall, of course, that Europeans were shocked to learn just 2 months ago of those direct talks between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So you could argue that this meeting was at least partially aimed at allowing Europeans to kind of save face and to show that they are still relevant in this negotiating process. But there is some conflicting messaging, I think, coming from the White House and notably the State Department at this point. I'll start with the statement from the U.S. Secretary of State's office that was published yesterday. Right after the meetings were held, Marco Rubio actually spoke with none other than his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. Rubio's office said then that the encouraging reception in Paris to the U.S. framework shows that peace is possible if all parties commit to reaching an agreement. It is telling that Rubio spoke immediately to the Kremlin after these talks with the Europeans, and also that he describes the meeting in Paris as encouraging reception to the U.S. framework, suggesting that peace will be obtained on Washington terms, not Europe's and not Ukraine's. That statement is slightly different than what we saw come out of the French presidential office, the presidential palace saying that these discussions primarily dealt with peace negotiations aimed at ending Russian aggression, and they come in continuity with the recent exchanges between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump, and alongside the work of that infamous coalition of the willing that is co-presided by France and the United Kingdom. As for that conflicting messaging from the State Department that I mentioned earlier, as we saw when we heard from Marco Rubio at the top of this bulletin, he says he wants Europeans to remain engaged in these talks, notably the UK, France, and Germany, who he said are helpful and constructive, though he made no mention of that coalition of the willing, nor the potential for security guarantees, which is, of course, what the European Union and NATO are hoping to obtain from Washington.
And what are Ukrainians saying about these talks?
Well, like his French counterpart, Catalina, the Ukrainian president praised these discussions. He said they're a step towards achieving real security in Europe. His chief of staff also thanked the French president for these efforts trying to receive a lasting peace in Ukraine. But at the same time, Volodymyr Zelensky himself did acknowledge that not much has changed from Washington. Now, that was yesterday prior to the comments that we just heard from Marco Rubio. He had accused the White House, specifically the special envoy Steve Witkoff, of spreading Russian narratives. Now, that was a reference to Witkoff suggesting last week after his talks with Vladimir Putin that a peace deal between Moscow and Kyiv will largely hinge on the status of 5 territories in Ukraine that are under varying degrees of Russian occupation. That is to say, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Now, Kyiv had quickly responded that it will never recognize any of those regions as Russian. That has not prevented Ukraine, though, in the meantime, from making a bit of progress towards responding to some of what Washington wants. The Ukrainian economy minister said on Thursday that Kyiv has indeed signed a memorandum of intent on an investment fund for the reconstruction for Ukraine. That is, of course, that infamous minerals deal. The U.S. has claimed that the two will be signing an agreement to that effect next week. So we'll see if that changes Washington's position at all, and most importantly, if it changes its response to some of Ukraine's demands to end this war.
That was Erin Ogunkeye for us, our international affairs editor. Thank you for this analysis.